welcome to the Church Planners Toolbox. Here we are again. My name is Justin, if you haven't watched this episode already, and there's my sending church pastor, Pastor Josh.
Hello, welcome back.
This is a church planting podcast going through the timeline of a church plant being in development. So I'm planting Detroit Baptist Church in the fall of 2027, and my sending church is my pastor here from Dearborn Baptist Church.
Yes, and we just passed one big milestone in the planting of Detroit Baptist Church, that Justin this weekend went through ordination, which is our process of like confirmation, and also that was concluded with a vote of the church, not just to ordain, but to commission the Neal family to plant Dearborn Baptist Church. And so maybe we'll be able to talk about ordination and commissioning at some point. It doesn't necessarily fall within this timeline. We're kind of assuming some of those things, but that's, particular to our independent Baptist model and doctrine.
Yeah, and just as a side note, I appreciated, because I've been serving in Dearborn for a couple years, I appreciated waiting until my ordination, until there's a specific place I was being planted to. I think it's really, it communicates well that when I'm being ordained, that I'm being ordained, being commissioned also to what I'm going to be ordained to, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm ordained as a pastor, but what am I pastoring? I'm going to be pastoring Detroit Baptist Church.
Yeah, so ordination is to an office, to be office of a pastor, but can also be to a work, like we see in Acts, separating Barnabas and Saul for the work that the Holy Ghost had called them to. And so ours really entailed both of those things this weekend. And so that's an exciting step. It's out there and starting to gain some momentum on support raising, which we will get to on one of the upcoming episodes, are some tips and things for raising support for a church plant. But we're still in foundation stage, which is all kind of lead up to that.
Sure. Yeah. And today we'll be starting our new sub-series, Developing Vision. The last few episodes, we've been going over discerning calling. But now we're going into three other categories within developing vision. We'll be going over choosing a church name, writing out MVP statements, which are the mission, vision, and purpose, and then to begin branding. So each of those are going to be their own episodes. But today's episode, we're going to be emphasizing on choosing a church name. So Pastor Josh, have Dearborn Baptist Church.
Yeah.
not necessarily a creative name, but tell me about your philosophy in terms of naming your church.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one because I've wanted to do an episode like this or for a while, just because I love the process of naming things. I tell people all the time I thoroughly enjoyed naming each of my children. That was that was kind of my part of the process, right? I really wanted to be involved in that and come up with meaningful names. Naming the church is like that. You get to kind of name this entity. And so I enjoy it myself. And I think it is a big part of this subpart of developing vision. So we talked about calling as far as what is the calling? I am going to plant a church, and then, narrow it down to I'm going to plant a church here in this city, in this subsection of a city. So you have your where and your what. And then vision is where it starts to get real specific into the context. And so we're starting with the name, and then we're going to talk about mission, vision, purpose statements, and then branding, but really all of these things work together. So all of these things kind of develop together. It's not necessarily like a step 1, step 2, step 3 of developing vision. And if you look at the timeline, you'll see that there's really just a whole time frame. But basically, these are things that you should have finished, I believe, before you publicly announce your church plant, before you start raising support. This is all, again, foundational stuff. We call this the foundation stage. So this is something that you need to work through really before you go public.
That's awesome. And along the same lines, not necessarily in order 1, 2, 3, and you may be developing all three of these at the same time. As you're developing your vision.
And we'll see how they all tie together very well. When it comes to naming a church, there's a few things, first of all, that because a church name, it's going to communicate a lot. It's going to represent you to the world. So it is an important thing that that is worth some time and discernment. And I've seen names that fall into a number of different categories. That's one of the things I want to try to do is like, here's some of the options that you have or directions you can go when naming your church, and maybe look at some pros or cons of either one of those, like why you'd want to go one direction over another. But I'll just address one part of naming a church, is that, and this is, my opinion, based on, my doctrinal position as an independent Baptist. I think that when you're naming your church, you should use the word church as a starter.
Yeah.
That is our English word that represents the entity that Jesus started and is building. It is the church. I know there are trends away from even using the word church.
Sure. Yeah.
And, just kind of being very, maybe that's not the intention, but it ends up being a very vague thing. If you're just going to brand yourself as something other than a church, or just not use the word at all.
Do you think people are doing that just as a way to like be more palatable to the community? Is it a way to be more relevant, maybe?
Perhaps. I mean, maybe people feel like there's, maybe bad connotations with the word church, or people want to go to church. But I don't think we get away from what it is. And I think it's best to be honest. And then, so in my perspective, that extends not just in use the word church, but in having a denominational label in your church name. There's trends away from that as well.
True.
To where maybe people, we'll keep the word church, but we're not going to have any denominational label. We'll be a Baptist church, but we'll just call ourselves, something church.
Yeah.
And lose the word Baptist, or if you're in a different denomination, you don't lose that denominational label. I still think it's valuable and important to have those labels. I think it's a good way to communicate who you are, what you believe. And so I'm an advocate for, at least in the context of Baptist churches, call yourself what you are. Be a Baptist church, and I still think that it there's always the danger of like maybe some of the trend away from that is because people feel like, well, there's other people that use the name that I wouldn't want to associate with, and that's true. The word
valid.
is used pretty broadly.
Yeah.
But I still think it's a word that has value and is worth defining and defending and using. And so I've used it in our church name, and I encourage church planners to, be Baptist and put it in your name.
And when we're talking about Baptist and church in their own, categories in terms of naming your church, I think another element to add to those too is that instead of running away from the association, you can be a part of being a good representation of that, a good representation of a church, and a good representation of a Baptist church.
Yeah. Because in the Baptist, and like I say, we're independent Baptist, which is a subset of that, is, we call it a denominational label. But in the true sense of Baptist doctrine, it's not a denominational label. I think independent Baptists are truly not denominational, and that we're not part of some organization. That's not what it is. It really is an identity with a doctrine and teaching. And so we'll get with that, because I have some notes on that when it comes more to our mission, vision, and purpose.
Oh, okay.
And how
Sure.
like your doctrinal identity fits into that. But I think, part of your mission, vision, purpose, and that's why these episodes are very well going to tie together. Part of your mission, vision, purpose is going to come out in your name. And your name, I think, can represent all three of those things.
Sure, yeah.
And especially if you kind of look at it in that sense of a name having three parts, which is kind of a typical formula.
Yeah.
And, part of your vision ought to be what type of church you're going to produce, which in our context would be a Baptist church. And ultimately your purpose, I think, is tied in that last word, church. What are you? Why are you? Like, we are a church, which means we exist for an already defined purpose. And so a name is ultimately going to be a reflection of who you are. It can be a reflection of what you believe, and a reflection of your specific vision for ministry. And And so what's in a name, right?
Yeah.
A lot can be in a name.
It's true. And I would ask more about that, but we're going to be getting into those categories.
Yeah. And I, as far as like the denominational label and the church name, I just feel like that's an important kind of ground to lay. Cause I'm more prepared to talk about that first part of like, what are you going to name your church?
Yeah.
But I just wanted to explain why, I think all three parts of a church name are important.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And, aren't just there as filler. They should mean something. They're there for a purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. So ground level Baptist church, those are pretty fundamentally.
So if you're going to start a Baptist church, you already decided that. What should you call this church? Because if we were all just called Baptist church, there would be no distinction. And so I think there is a need for names to distinguish ourselves because we are independent. We believe in autonomy. It's not all one church. They're local churches. And so how do the churches develop names? And so some of this is just by observation. I had some intention to do some like statistical survey because I have some big church databases that I've kind of collected on, looking at that data and trying to discern some trends. But most of this is just going to be on my own observation of that without the statistics yet to back it up.
Okay.
But just what that is. And I even have spent some time this week going over, all of our supporting church data from 4 years. And so I've been looking at all those names. So those are probably the names that are going to come out of my head. So if you're one of our supporting churches, your name might come up here because I've been looking at all those names just over the last couple days. Yeah.
So so in terms of, I like the creativity of Dearborn Baptist Church. And we've had this conversation before about naming a church after the city you're in.
Yeah.
Would you like to elaborate on the importance of that?
Yeah. So we'll jump into so what are the options when it comes to naming your church? What are the common practices in church naming? And I think the first one, which I'll just, put my vote in behind right away. Like my preference is for a geographic church name. And I'm not going against all the other ones. I think there's great use for them and great reason to do them. I'm just saying this is the way that I went and, kind of my favorite. I think there's some advantage to it. And that is naming your church after the city or region that you are going into. I think just on the first level, there is some biblical basis for this. We believe in churches, that churches are local churches. And when we look at the New Testament, we see those churches took on the identity of their community. So, the New Testament naming convention is Church at Jerusalem, Church at Antioch,
Thessalonica, Berea,
right? Or the churches of Galatia. They identified with their region, which at that point there was no competition, and not competition like I'm saying in the friendly sense. There weren't multiple churches in a region yet. I mean, these were the very first churches. So they didn't have to necessarily distinguish themselves any more than just, the church at Antioch. Because there wasn't another one. Not that there couldn't or shouldn't or wouldn't be, but it was just that early stage. But we start to see the churches identifying with their community. So I think there's a strong biblical foundation for that. And I think it carries some advantage. So you can do this in a number of ways. We see churches named after cities. So that's the direction we went. We have Dearborn Baptist Church and our planting Detroit Baptist Church.
Yep.
But I've seen churches named after counties.
Sure.
Churches named after like nicknames of cities, or like if the region has kind of a name or a nickname.
An example would be for like Detroit would be Motor City. Detroit's known as being Motor City, so I could have gone with Motor City Baptist Church, which sounds pretty cool. I think that was a little long for me though.
But ultimately, one of the goals of church naming is always going to be differentiation from other churches.
That's true.
So it's part of it is identifying, with the body of doctrine and belief, and identifying yourself and your mission, vision, and purpose. But another purpose of it is to differentiate between other churches. So I'd say a first step in naming your church is to do a good survey of all the other churches in the area. Find what they're all called. Don't name yourself the same exact thing as somebody else, but find a difference. And so that's where I like the idea of a geographic name for a church, because I think it really a pro would be that it identifies really well with the community, has some maybe sense of permanence, and people they typically like to identify with their community name. They're already for Detroit if they live in Detroit, right? And so it might be easier for them to say like, okay, well, this is for me, or I can be part of this because it's just because of what it's called. And so I think that's an advantage. But one of the difficulties with geographic names, again, can be availability. Because if there are other churches, it's likely some of them are already called that. So that's why it is necessary, I think, sometimes to branch out from that and use other names.
Yeah, true.
And again, I'm not saying one's right or wrong at all in this, so please don't say that I'm saying that. I'm just talking some of my preferences, but then maybe some of the advantages that we see of geographic names. But then there's a lot of, with geographic names, you can go with geographic features. And so you see lots of churches that are called, River Baptist or Hilltop Baptist or Valley Baptist. Or an increasing one we'll see is just called City Baptist Church. And so you're just kind of identifying with the geography of your area.
Yeah, which is nice.
And that's a type of a geographic name, which can, people can identify with. And may give you some more options if, there are a lot of churches that are already using the name of the city or something like that. That would be part of a geographic name. Another practice within geographic naming is like directional names. Really popular. You see a lot of them. So you'll see like, even within one city, you'll have a North Baptist and a South Baptist, or a Southwest Baptist, or a Northeast Baptist. They identify with like what region of the city they're in. Can be used.
Yeah, that's good.
But those do tend to be used a lot. And again, one of the goals of naming is to differentiate yourself from other local churches. But I do think there's also a consideration to differentiate yourself from even other denominational churches, other Baptist churches.
Yeah, because, especially if you haven't launched your church yet and you're on deputation. Yeah. I think it carries some weight, and it's good to have a unique name that stands out.
Because there's, so one of the other common directions, let's just address one. I don't think anybody's still, like, if we're talking about church planting, it's not going to be common to use this, but, one of the most common church names you're going to see anywhere is First Baptist.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I suppose that was like, very much a church planting kind of name, because if you were the First Baptist church in an area, that was kind of the practice. And then you even see in some areas a First Baptist, a Second Baptist, a Third Baptist. And, some cities like, I'm thinking of like Houston, you even see like Fourth Baptist and Fifth Baptist. And what becomes necessary there is to have a geographical specification on your name. So you have to be First Baptist of this city.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot.
And so it's still a geographic name, just because there's so many First Baptists.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what starts to happen with any kind of super common name, so there's the First Baptist thing, which is kind of its own category. I haven't seen anybody plant a First Baptist church recently. If you're going to a place that's never had a Baptist church, then do it. Why not?
That'd be great.
But in the context of U.S. church planting, there typically is going to be somebody that's already there or has that name, I guess. But what becomes necessary if you have a super common name, so the other category of names, we'll just move on to a second one. So you have geographic names. Under that, you have directional names, ordinal names like first, second, third, is biblical-based names.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, again, that these are not as good or not as right or anything like that. It's perfectly fine to name your church something after the Bible, right? That's, you're always okay going with the Bible. And so examples of this would be Calvary Baptist Church.
Calvary Baptist Church.
Emmanuel Baptist Church, Cornerstone Baptist Church,
Bible Baptist Church.
Yeah, I mean,
I've
literally
seen-
naming
I've
it
seen-
after the Bible.
Yeah,
I
I've
think
seen
that
Bible
would
Baptist Church.
that would fall in that category. Bible Baptist Church, Berean Baptist, Antioch Baptist. Those are named after specific churches.
Yeah.
Maybe bad examples of that is, and again, please don't be mad at me if this is your church name. But I've seen churches that are called Corinthian Baptist Church. Whereas like maybe Berean has some good connotation. If you're naming your church Corinthian Baptist Church, and maybe you're just being honest and saying like,
True, yeah.
our church has got problems, so maybe it is a good thing. But, people identify with those early churches.
Yeah.
And those can be fine, but ultimately, I think a church name should have purpose, and that purpose should be connecting with and communicating your vision. So if that particular biblical reference is really tied to your mission statement, then use it.
I think that's the biggest strength with having a biblical name for your church is that you really get to openly attach your church's name to your church's vision.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an easy way to do that. There are some dangers, not dangers, but maybe things to watch out for within that is, not to go maybe too obscure or something that, people just maybe wouldn't understand or be able to identify with. And again, sometimes the connotation, so like, not like Corinthian, but I've seen churches called like King Solomon Baptist Church or things like that. It's like, okay, that's cool. But you really got to be specific on some of those things.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, having strong biblical grounding is a great way to connect with your vision. I've seen in some cases where like a church has been around for a long time. Maybe the pastor who started it named it for that specific reason because it was part of his mission, vision, or purpose. But then maybe like that pastor's gone, that pastor passed away, generations go on. And I have seen churches that are completely disconnected from their names. Like their name is there, but it just doesn't match their current purpose, or they don't identify with, they don't relate it with it. They're not using it. And so in that case, like either reconnect with that vision and let that name mean something, or change the name. You're allowed to change the name.
Because at the end of the day, that's the purpose of a name, right?
Yeah.
It's an identity for the church, that whether you're doing geographic or biblical, the group is choosing to identify with whatever that church's name is representing.
Right.
So the name puts a label on that.
Yeah. And so we're talking about church planting. So we're talking about coming up with a name that, for a church that doesn't yet exist. Not as much about changing a name, wasn't really the idea of the topic. But you can have geographic names. Then you have biblical names, which are, words from the Bible. If you're going to do that, make sure it's tied to your vision or your purpose. And then there's another category similar to that, but I would differentiate it to doctrinal names. So there are church names that really strongly, not as much are identifying with like a vision for the church. They could be, but maybe more the doctrine of the church. So for example, and this is where we get to some of those like really common church names.
Okay.
Grace Baptist, Faith Baptist.
Okay, I see.
Hope Baptist, Trinity Baptist, Gospel Baptist, or Bible Baptist.
Okay,
might fall in that category.
Oh yeah, I see.
And so sometimes, and hey, great names, like great things to identify with. I think the only problem with choosing a name like that as a church planter you have to consider is how common those names are. And I have seen where even though we're independent churches, when a name is like that, if a name is Faith Baptist, or this can even happen with First Baptists or things like that, people from the outside, people from the community might identify or connect you with another church with the same name. Because they're kind of used to like in a denominational sense, or, maybe their context is kind of like that, mega church kind of satellite context where like these churches all have the same name because they're all the same church. Will connect you with all the other Grace Baptists they've ever been to, or all the other Faith Baptists they've ever been to.
Yeah, you're saying especially for the people who aren't familiar maybe with the Baptist Circle, the Independent Baptist Circle, they come in, they see, oh, I've seen this Faith Baptist Church before, and the last state I lived in, and they associate everything with that.
Yeah, and it's not always a good association, because sometimes it's like, oh, well, that Faith Baptist Church there really, had some problems or blew up. Or like, are you guys connected with them? And like, okay, maybe that you're gonna have to deal with some of that stuff anyways of people misunderstanding. You can't necessarily do that, but it does become necessary to further differentiate yourself. So then, just like with the First Baptist thing, you have to be, Faith Baptist of this city. So again, nothing wrong with the name, but we're talking about in the context of church planting.
Sure.
I'm just trying to give you some of the considerations of if you're going to go with a really common name, you need to even further brand or identify yourself even within that name or all the other churches that are going to carry that name.
It's one of those things that it's really simple. Like it's just a few words, right? To name your church. Mm-hmm. But hopefully that name is going to last through like a majority of your church's lifetime.
Yeah.
And so it's that one season you have where you get to choose that name, choose it in a way that's going to benefit you.
And again, that name, like even these names, Grace or Faith or Hope, like these can be really strong names if they're strongly tied to your identity and your mission. If it's, if you're just choosing that name because of a tradition or something like that, and it's not really tied to that, then it's not going to be a strong identity with your mission, vision, or purpose. And so those would be kind of some of those doctrinal names, do become real common. And then there's another category that I would define or differentiate from those, which would be, I'm going to call them mission-based names.
Okay.
In that, hopefully all the names are mission-based, right? Like if you have a geographic name, your mission is we're here to reach this city. And so that can be great for having a really great, like a missionary mindset of like, we're here in Dearborn for Dearborn. And that's kind of how we've used that language to connect our name to our mission. We're a church in Dearborn for Dearborn. And then we're using that name, Dearborn.
Yeah.
And you can do the same thing with a Bible-based name or a doctrinal name. Those are kind of similar categories. But a vision-based name is something that's not necessarily like straight like a biblical name, like a name of God or name of a doctrine, but connects to your vision in a specific way. So we see a lot of, for example, a Harvest Baptist Church. Now that is kind of a biblical name, right?
Yeah,
so Harvest truly is plenteous. Like you can connect it to the Bible. But you see where it may be a different category, or a Lighthouse Baptist Church.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like our church wants to be a lighthouse to this community. Great name. You can tie it to the Bible of let your light so shine before men. But the name is more coming from the vision than a direct reference to a biblical doctrine or passage.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Like Harvest, yes, is a biblical name, but when you hear, especially in our church context, when you hear harvest, you think of the harvest is plenteous. It's a name that calls for the mission, that calls for action.
And so sometimes those can like if you're in a rural community, that's largely a farming community, a Harvest Baptist Church could really speak to those people, right? They can identify with that and then get behind that mission because they can identify with it. Maybe if you are a coastal city, maybe Lighthouse is a good name because it's something people can identify with, that kind of nautical sense or theme. It's part of who they are, ties to the identity of the community as well. Some other examples would be like a Victory Baptist Church, common name, but I imagine it's probably going to be tied to a biblical passage, God gives us the victory through Jesus Christ, more than conquerors kind of thing, but also tied to the vision for the church. We want to help people achieve victory over sin or, whatever, however you word it.
Yeah, it's close to biblical or doctrine, but all those examples you're giving, they're really, really closely tied to what the church is doing.
Yeah.
And the mission it's carrying out.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, have you ever seen, I don't know, I feel like I've heard a name like this before, like Great Commission Baptist Church. I think I've heard that one before.
Yeah.
It might fall into that category. Or Oh, man.
Or just Mission Baptist. I've seen.
Community Baptist Church.
So I would say though. So okay, let me do one more subcategory.
Okay,
So
all right.
subcategory of vision-based names are like communal or relational names.
Okay, yeah.
And it has its own category because it is so popular. Like just amongst all of our supporting churches, like there's a bunch of First Baptists, bunch of Heritage Baptists, and then there's a bunch of Community Baptists.
Yeah.
So Community Baptist, great name. It's not necessarily tying to a specific community, like a geographic name or a directional name or something. It's still a vision-based name, right? So that's why I would fall into the category of vision-based names, because hopefully it's like, your vision then is we want to be a church for our community or create a compelling community kind of thing.
Or have a godly community within our church. Like that's the vision.
You're going to emphasize that. So Fellowship Baptist. I know a lot of Fellowship Baptist churches. I've seen Family Baptist, Friendship Baptist, and maybe even City Baptist could, something like that could fit in that category.
It carries that, yeah. I think it carries that weight, yeah.
But yeah, the communal or relational names can have a strong emphasis on people, on relationships, on like belonging to this community. And so in a certain community, if that's your vision, that's kind of really what you think would be compelling to people, then it can be a great name. Again, if it differentiates you from the other churches in the community, and gives you a unique identity that can communicate your vision.
Yeah, that's good.
For people to identify with you.
Yeah, those are good examples. We were talking a lot about how the name can be something that people can identify with and that they can take on. Are there any other factors when you're looking at a community that you look out for to help you figure out what you're going to name your church?
Yeah, so beyond just like finding a name that has meaning, I think that's the first thing. A name needs to mean something, and like, how is this going to tie to our vision? So, the things we're going to talk about next in mission, vision, purpose, you probably need to do some of that work to come up with your name.
Yeah, true.
Maybe sometimes it's like, no, this is what I want to call it, and I'm going to kind of craft everything around that name. That happens. That's okay too. But they should be connected. But the biggest factor, like I said, do a survey of your community, get the other church names, make sure you're differentiating yourself, and then before you go all in on a church name, check the availability of the name. So that's a first step forward of like, hey, is this a name we can use? Check the availability of it. One, is anybody else in the community using that name? Can we differentiate ourselves with this name? And then in today's world of media and marketing, you do need to take the steps of checking the availability of the name as a domain name.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm a web designer, so that's kind of always my first step. Anytime I have an idea for anything, I go check the domain names and try to get them, because that is there's limitation of online real estate through these domains. And so, but it's also a good sign. Like if you have a good idea for a name, even before you check every church in town, go see if the domain names are there. And if nobody's touching the domains, there's a good chance nobody's using that name. It's wide open.
It's also helpful. I mean, and you've told me this before, when you're picking a domain name, that it's not super long or like it's a lot to like, it doesn't look nice if a domain name is super big, but if you can condense it, right?
Yeah, there's just some general good practices for domain names themselves. And having it short, memorable, readable are important. Those ones are typically going to be worth more money if it's super short. So like, but then again, it's an availability thing. So you're probably not going to get, dbc.com, right? That guy's long gone. Or if it was available, it'd be thousands of dollars.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So, domains can be super valuable. You're probably not going to get faithbaptist.com either. I'm always amazed though. Sometimes I will stumble across a church with like a great domain like that, like that has like the 3-letter, I'm like, well, they must have gotten their website like back when the internet started, and they've been holding on to that name all this time. So you may have to get creative, especially if you're using a common name, in finding a good domain. I guess this would be a point to talk about it because we're talking about naming and domains. You can be creative with it. I've seen some good domain names that aren't necessarily the church name. Doesn't have to be the church name. If your church name's not available, get a domain that more identifies with your community. Maybe if your church name doesn't have the geography in it, your domain name could. So like we have dearbornbaptist.com and dearbornbaptist.church, which .church is kind of a new thing, which has maybe opened up new availability. So maybe you can't get the .com, but you could get the .church. It's a good domain. But I've seen, we've also bought for dearborn.org, and we use that for other purposes. But like, I think the key with a domain name is, again, something that's memorable, simple, because you're going to put this on all your printed materials. And you want somebody to be able to see if you do a commercial or an ad, not just be able to click a link, but potentially remember that name and go find you on your website. But we're just talking about availability. And a domain check is something that's good to make sure, hey, can I get a good domain that goes with this name? And then kind of connected to that is social media, another important part of this. If I can get a domain, can I get social media handles or usernames that are similar or match?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value to being able to kind of match your domain and your social media identity. So we went with dearbornbaptist.church for our domain name, but then we were able to get that for Facebook as well. So we're facebook.com/dearbornbaptist.church, and then we can use the @dearbornbaptist.church for Facebook, Instagram, and the tricky thing is sometimes different platforms have different rules of how long your name could be or what special characters you can. So it's not always possible to get it exactly the same, but it's nice to get it close.
Yeah. For mine, there are some social medias I couldn't have .church for.
Yeah.
So I just decided to do Detroit Baptist Church for my social media handles. So I have that Facebook, Instagram. X can only go so long. So right now I have Detroit Baptist C. At the end, that's as far as I can go with the characters.
And with the Detroit Baptist Church name, like same thing with the Dearborn Baptist Church. It like when I was praying about whether or not we should come to Dearborn and I started looking at domains, the fact that there wasn't a Dearborn Baptist Church, like that didn't exist.
Yeah, same
that
with
was
Detroit.
part of the thing is like all that was like nobody's using these names. Like what? And, like somebody has to do this. And
I felt the same way with Detroit Baptist Church.
The fact that all those domains and that online real estate was available. For me, that's like a sign of need. Like, wow, there should definitely be a Detroit Baptist Church. So I'm excited about that work. But whatever your name is, make it as unique as you can. Yep. And, sometimes people take creativity too far and that they're going to come up with some church name that's never been used. And that's not probably a good thing.
You don't want to be too unique.
Yeah.
Because then you want to deliver a message with the name, right? Yeah. And if it's so unique, you're not saying anything. No one understands what you mean.
Right.
If you have such a weird name.
Yeah, and when we talk about mission, vision, and purpose, I'll share specifically how each of those things are connected to our name and how we kind of communicate that. And then it even comes out in our branding. But you got to start with a name. And it's a fun part of the process. But that's where it starts to become really real. And that's where we put it under vision. So not only are you saying like there should be a church or we need to plant a church here, but now you can say, hey, pray for this and this Baptist church. And it doesn't exist at that point, right?
True.
You start talking about it like it's this thing everybody knows about, but it doesn't actually exist. There is no Detroit Baptist Church.
Yeah, it was funny, doing Detroit Baptist Church. I have like the logo with the emblem around it. Mm-hmm. Detroit Baptist Church established 2027.
Yeah.
Like it's already happened. It's already happened because it's happening.
Yeah. And that's vision. Vision's being able to see something that doesn't exist and eyes of faith. So it's evidence of things unseen. It is a step of faith, and church planting is an exercise of faith from beginning to end.
That's right.
And so, put some of that into your name and get a name that has some meaning that can differentiate you from the community. Yep. But also identify who you are and how you're going to relate to that community.
Awesome. So this developing a church name is going to tie, like you said, tie very closely with developing your mission, vision, and purpose statements, and also the branding of your church. So we look forward to the next episodes coming up that will connect with those ideas. And until then, we'll see you then. Thank you for attending and watching the Church Planners Toolbox podcast.